Hi, I'm Chris from airwindows, and I put on this crazy headphones with this funky microphone all covered in fuzz so that I can tell you about something, the new plugin that I'm coming out with, and it is called Logical 3. Logical is designed to be a two-bus plugin. It is a two-bus compressor specifically. And the first version of Logical was designed to sound as much as possible like classic SSL compressors. Second version, I dropped some things about the first version, like the convolution impulses making it, and I used an algorithm that gave the same kind of high frequency treble aura that you get off of these compressors. And they call it a hit record sound. I worked out that's mostly about a certain kind of high frequency tiz that you get that is very characteristic of these things. And this third version is doing two things. One, it's bringing the sound quality up another level to the point where it is to be compared directly with expensive analog compressors. This is not one to necessarily shoot out against the software guys, because it's on kind of another level. It's designed to be shot out against hardware compressors with decent conversion. In fact, I have used it to compare directly with, or somebody else used it to do this because I don't have the resources, but I have the resources to program, and thankfully that's enough for the time being. It was shot out against a hardware compressor and a set of converters totaling about $3,000 and beat it about 2 times out of 3. Sounds kind of like this. This is in bypass. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit the bypass control, turn it on, and get a good aggressive compressed sound out of the sucker. Now here's how this works. This is mostly the standard controls for a compressor, but this is not a standard digital algorithm. So I more or less had to wrestle them into behaving the way that people expect them to behave. If there are any quirks or idiosyncrasies, like when you push it all the way to a ratio of 10 to 1, it kind of boosts the volume to some extent. Try to work around that stuff because this is not a normal algorithm doing it. I'm sort of twisting it into the form where it acts like people would normally expect. The ratio control works in stages. It was designed to go along to what people originally wanted, which was a dry-wet control. I decided that a dry-wet control is kind of like 1-to-1 ratio. 1-to-1 ratio should be dry, and so therefore as you start increasing it, and I'll exaggerate this by pushing this up even farther, you start bringing in the compressed sound, you start bringing in the wet, and then as you continue to push it, it becomes more obvious. You should be able to hear that's quite obvious now. And then as you continue to push it, you bring in more stages until it is an extreme compressed sound. Now, one thing that we've also got here is a control called reaction speed. Reaction speed acts kind of like an attack speed, but the thing about Logical is that there is no distinct attack and decay sections. It's doing stuff with the algorithm, it's doing stuff with the waveform, kind of in general. So there's no specific point where it's like, okay, now it's releasing, okay, now it's attacking. It's just kind of, well, I'll demonstrate it. We've got a setting that goes all the way up to 50 milliseconds, which is more than you usually get with SSL style compressors. And the idea is that you can get more of a front on the wave this way. And then as you increase reaction speed, the entire thing starts responding faster, and you get more taken off the front of the wave. Around here we start getting some real interesting snare sounds. You can give it a little bit more threshold there, and it really starts to pop. Then as you go even faster, you start getting a real smashed sound. Like that's an absolutely crunched snare. Still with a nice little pop on the front of it. And as you push the reaction speed all the way, crank it up completely, you start getting a real exaggerated zippy sound that absolutely blows everything up. That's perhaps more of a fast reaction than you would necessarily want. So we'll pull it back out again a little bit. Now this is the sort of sound that you might do for a ridiculous drum sound, for instance. Or you can bring it back up here again, and then using the same sound you can just clamp down on, say, the snare. And doing that, we've got just an overhead. This is simply two microphones and no extra drums. But you can remix the internal volumes of it by taking the snare, which is a lot louder than everything else, and crushing it. It brings out the kick a little bit. We can slow it down a little bit more. And in this way we can get a good drum sound out of very simple miking. But this is designed to be a 2-bus compressor. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a second to reconfigure it for more typical 2-bus setting, probably about 1.6 to 1.7 to 1. And reaction speed might be 10, 20 milliseconds or so. It's nice to have it be running kind of slow, because one thing that is also going to do is it's smoothing out the mid-range, it's smoothing out the reactions of the compressor, and giving more mid-range purity that way. And then you're not necessarily going to want a lot of threshold. Now the interesting thing about this is that it's going to be hard to tell the difference between the bypass sound and the regular sound unless we decrease the threshold so that it's taking more of an effect. And this is something that you actually want. We are bringing out the high frequencies to some extent because this type of compressor, and this is not an SSL clone, this is just doing the same types of things, but it's no longer attempting to get like matching high frequency or anything like that. It's trying to compete in the same arena without having necessarily exactly the same sound. We will run the sound again, and here we've got the bypass, and then kick it in. You'll notice that it feels and sounds very similar. This is what you want. You want it to sound very similar because we don't want to lose the qualities of the mix. You never want to lose anything putting a mix through something like this. It's always going to be a risk. What we can do to hear it more clearly is lower the threshold. Now, having done that, we're starting to hit the snare because that's what we hit first. So we have the dry here. This is what you want in a mixed bus compressor, is the ability to adjust these things, and this can be adjusted in more fine increments than you usually get with like software clones of SSLs and things, where you have basically just a couple of presets for that. It seems like since this is a algorithm, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to like slide it a little bit closer to shorter, or slide it a little bit, maybe past 20. If you want a slightly more of a knob on the front of the attack, push it a little bit to be maybe, oh, just jump the ratio up there. Push it up a little bit, maybe flatten it out a little bit more. Go to a larger ratio. These things should be possible. It's software. Software is malleable and adaptable. And then if you exaggerate it even farther, this is about 2-to-1 compression. So it steps on things. But since this is using, the ratios are using successive stages of compression, 1-to-1 is basically dry, and then you increase it, and you start getting the compressed effect, but there's still a great deal of clarity involved. Logical 3 is an audio unit plugin. It'll run on Logic, it'll run on Ableton Live, and whatever Mac software uses audio units, which is a fair number of them. It is compiled to be PowerPC, 32-bit Intel, and 64-bit Intel. So it is good for Logic X. It's good for future Logics that require 64-bit, and I've been doing 64-bit for over a year now. And it's also just as good for old G3 and G4 Macs that aren't even Intel yet. So it covers a big range that way. And it's designed like that for a reason. I'm trying to make software that's accessible for people to use. I don't actually no, I do need to use that because the microphone's there. Hey, you gotta forgive me. I'm not very good at doing these videos and things like that. I program. That's pretty much what I do, is this here. So I'm doing the best that I can with this. Bear with me. Logical 3 is $50. All previous owners of any version of Logical will get Logical 3 for free. Or technically what you'll get is an email saying, please respond to this email, and you'll get the free copy, because I'm not so much into randomly sending out a gajillion copies to I'm not sure where, and who knows what might happen to them. I would rather hear back from people that the email is still good, and then you'll have your free copy. But if you buy Logical 3, you will get all future developments of Logical that might happen. And you know, every time I've done a version of this, I figured like, okay, this is it. I've really nailed it now. And pretty much every time I have managed to discover new things with which I was able to improve it. So it is a good thing to jump on the development of airwindows plugins and see them move along. Logical has been going for a while. At this point, it is a software plugin that is designed to compete directly with the best of analog hardware for mixed bus compression. It's not attempting to be a clone. It started out as an SSL clone, but it's not attempting to be a clone. It's attempting to have a sound that is musical and workable and reacts the way that you would expect it to react, like with the ratio and so on. I've done my best to bring it into a zone where it behaves the way people expect it, so you can set stuff up and be in the ballpark. And yeah, like I said, it is $50, and I hope you like it.